Welcome, Matt, to the Flagstaff Gallery. Can you please tell us a little bit about your background with regard to art and how you got involved in being a professional artist?
Both my parents were professional artists, so I sort of grew up in surrounded by art, and really it's just I couldn't really avoid it. It's just something that kind of I guess it's in the genes or something. They put it in the water around at our place, don't they? Art. They feed it to you. It's like constantly spoon-fed. Monet, Gauguin, Corot. It's like Dad's just always talking about art, isn't he? So yeah, it's sort of just ingrained in me, I suppose.
And why do you choose to work in your chosen medium?
Look, I think that one of the things that's really important with art making is being quite, spontaneous or familiar. Like you need to spend a lot of time with a medium to sort of become kind of be able to, really kind of express yourself with it. So, that sort of old kind of concept of, like if you want to paint, you have to sort of spend 10 years painting. So, I'm very, very heavily involved in photography, have been, since for 20 years. So I sort of choose to express myself through that medium because it's the one that I kind of have the most sort of contact with. I take photographs every day. So, I also have a real long history of painting through my family and sort of relationship with painting. So I think the two things, photography and painting, are the two sort of mediums that are really kind of like important to me. So, and I combine them. I'm sort of, in a funny sort of way, my images are all sort of talking about the history of painting and how I feel about, like I don't think of myself as a photographer, I think of myself as a painter, but I use those two mediums to express myself.
Do you think the overwhelming amount of imagery that is in day-to-day life affects you in any way in your work? Photographic imagery?
Well, I suppose it has to. I spend a lot of time, I look at images on the internet, daily, sometimes, for hours and hours on end. I collect images from, books and from the internet and from magazines, always have ever since I was a child. And so, I'm obviously, really interested and very, in like images from films. And so, it must have an effect. It's certainly something that I'm really sort of active within. It's something that I kind of participate in kind of heavily, that whole exchange.
What is the primary motivation behind your work?
That's a pretty deep question. Yeah, look, I don't know. What's the? I'd probably go off on some sort of conversation about physics if you sort of aren't careful. I'll start talking about cellular structure and how life is sort of like, kind of just, art's just the kind of like a sort of part of the whole, that's sort of, entropy, the world's constantly in a process of disintegrating, and it's in a constant process of being reborn, and, art is part of the process of things being, reborn, and it's just sort of part of life's dance, isn't it? Really, the sort of things being made and things falling apart, and things sort of being born and things dying. So it's like this is my own little dance going on here.
There seems to be in your work a sense of nostalgia inherent in your landscapes. Is this intentional?
Yeah, I think so. I think that, I guess it's, I suppose it's intentional to a point. It's always an interesting kind of conversation, isn't it, around art, what's intentional and what's not, and, there's an old Chinese proverb, it's the man who knows does not speak and the man who speaks does not know. And so, you talk about your art and I mean, it's like, well, do you really know what you know what I mean? But I think there's something deeply nostalgic about me. I think that I'm quite an emotive kind of, and I'm really interested in poetry, and I'm really interested in sort of ways of expressing yourself, because I think that, ultimately words are not a particularly, good way of expressing yourself. Like, it's like words are a very limited form of expression. So, poetry is a step towards, another step towards trying to express yourself more fluently with words, but then obviously images is another sort of way. So I guess, and I guess to a certain extent, I am quite nostalgic, and I have a kind of real deep sort of, kind of relationship with this New Zealand and with the landscape and with the past, and so yeah, I guess that's me trying to sort of, in some ways trying to sort of find some kind of way of expressing that, but I wouldn't want to kind of get too caught up in the intellectualising of it, because I think ultimately, it's sort of, a lot of intellectualising about art can sound pretty post-factual, like almost a little bit like sort of something that's been tagged on to the sort of end of something after it's already been done, and I think you have to be really careful of that. You don't sort of, it's like we're sort of under all this pressure all the time to kind of intellectualise stuff and read stuff all the time, and you just go, oh yeah, right. So you be careful to around that subject. But look, I think ultimately poetry is what interests me, and the poetry in words and images. So that's the short answer.
Your images, your images are particularly poetic looking. Is that something you wish the viewer to take away with them when they look at your work?
No, that just is what happens. I don't, I'm not sort of, like it's, yeah, I mean, that's sort of obviously the images that speak to me in that sort of way are the images that, that I'm kind of interested in, and therefore that's what I put out there. But it's not something that I'm consciously trying to sort of, I think they're just the images that I relate to, really. Probably the sort of poetic ones, because I think ultimately that's probably what's going on for me. Ultimately there's a sort of, that's probably underneath it all what I'm looking for, in some kind of way of, explaining or communicating what I see.
You're based in Sydney
Yes.
now, but are there any challenges that you face creating art in Sydney, but also, being represented here in New Zealand? Or has New Zealand influenced you in making art?
Well, I think a lot of the time my work that I make about New Zealand is very much about me not being here and sort of, dreaming about being here, and, because one of the big things about when you go away from a place, like it's very easy, I mean, I spend a lot of time kind of, when I'm away, thinking that I'd like to be at home, not necessarily because I really want to be at home or that being at home is the answer, but it's just that idea of being somewhere else. And so I suppose, kind of, I have this kind of relationship with New Zealand that is from a distance, and that creates this kind of quite, I guess, nostalgic and slightly sort of poetic sort of view of it and ways. So yeah, not living here is important in that. Like, it's certainly something that, I kind of explore in my work, is the fact that I don't sort of live here. I don't know whether I would be even doing it if I lived here. I could well be doing something quite different if I was living here. So I think a lot of it has got to do with the fact that I'm not here, really. I certainly don't do this kind of work about other places I go. This is definitely about work, how I feel about New Zealand.
What excites you most about going to New York?
What excites me about going to New York? That's a pretty tough one for me, because I'm, to be I'm a deeply cynical person. I'm like this kind of real sort of not particular, I've got this sort of, so, I mean, I guess, every opportunity for me that comes up is an opportunity for me to have a look at what I'm doing and to, look at it and use it as an opportunity to sort of like create work, because I think, as an artist, you sort of, I'm always looking for, like whether it's an exhibition or it's something that's happening or, something that, there's this sort of constant sort of thing that you can get, energy you can get. So New York's this great opportunity for me to kind of like think about it and kind of like use it as an opportunity to make some art and to see where it sort of leads. It's very much in that sort of moment that's of interest to me. I can't relate to it in a sort of external way, if that makes any sense. It's a bit
What are your
motivation, isn't it? It's motivation to get to the studio and make work.
What are your thoughts about the Flagstaff Gallery bringing contemporary New Zealand art to New York?
Look, I think it's incredibly sort of bold and brave and ambitious and enthusiastic and optimistic. So, it's a pretty amazing, really. I mean, I'm just along for the ride, really. I'm just sort of like going, okay, well, what can I do? Like, I'm just sort of like, I'll just sort of be like, I'm like on one of those big Greek galleys where there's like 500 slaves all paddling the ship, and I've just got one little paddle. I'm going, okay, all right, okay, give me some water. But, that's how I see myself being this little, okay, what can I, anyway, that sort of makes that's a little word picture of how I feel about it.